Good morning once again, everyone. Welcome to the last of the three-part series on macronutrients. And we've already finished the macronutrients, carbohydrates, and proteins. Proteins via a pre-recorded lecture, and the last of the series. Fats is a synchronous lecture discussion. So I've mentioned this will be the last. This is the last topic of the macronutrient series, and therefore, as a reminder, please prepare for a unit exam which covers the three subtopics on macronutrients on Thursday from 10:30 to 11:15, as this will be a 45 item test. Okay. So to begin the discussion this morning, let me just bring up a laser pointer. We begin with an outline. So we will talk about the role of fat in the body. There are various roles of the macronutrient fat in the body, and we will be talking about these. Yes, this is a macronutrient marathon. And well, when we talk about roles of body fat, the what are their roles relative to their especially when we're talking about dietary fats. But there are functions of fats in the body, okay? And then we will proceed to fatty acids. Fatty acids are basically um, fatty acids are basically, let me just, okay. Fatty acids are basically the building blocks, the components of, of fats, okay? And then um, we will be discussing also fats in food, the different fats in food, and then the functions of fats in food as opposed to the functions of fats in the body. We will also talk about the functions of fats in food, although this is basically just a little bit of a review, kind of a review, as the functions of fats in food have been um, discussed, I think, in basic foods. And then quick facts on facts. Okay, facts. Right. So, and then as a last to wrap up, no, so the topic will be a little bit about the application of fats in particularly in the practice of nutrition. So, what are the different roles of fats? Um, Let me just, okay, there. So health is affected actually by too much as well as too little fat in the diet, and we know this to be true. We discussed early on in the in this course in ND14 that there is literally nothing in the world, including nutrients. And remember that we the three rule. um, I'm not sure if it's the three rule, but we do not, human beings do not survive. We die actually in about 3 minutes without air, about um, 3 days without water, and about 30 days without food. And if you think about that, so the hierarchy of the basic things that we need in order to live, in order to survive and thrive, are actually air, water, and food. But if you look at air, while air is very important, no, for survival, it's the shortest without air. Without it, and we die. Too much of the components of air, basically oxygen, we will die, right? Too much. Too little, we will also die. Um, but water as well, and we will discuss it further in the role of water in the succeeding sessions. Water as well, too much can also be debilitating to the body. So in relation to which, the same goes true for fat. Fat as a nutrient is essential. So we follow the same rule, moderation. If it's too much, it's going to be there's going to be an adverse effect. If it's too little as well, provided in the diet, there would be and opposing adverse effect. There are several functions of lipids in the body, which we will discuss in a while. And several of those, just an overview, are number one, they provide energy. Fat, in fact, is the highest in terms of energy yielded gram on gram. So compared to the other macronutrients, no, carbohydrates and protein, which only yield up to 4 kcal per gram, fat, on the other hand, generally will provide up to 9 K or more even. And as such, because fat is able to be stored and in practically unlimited, we can it's almost, no, it's practically unlimited. We can store fat for future use by the body in unlimited amounts. And this will be in the form of adipose tissue, which is the primary fat storage in the body, adipose tissue. No? So they can grow in size and they can grow indefinitely. Hormones secreted by fat help regulate also appetite and other functions, and we discussed this at length in the review on digestion and absorption. Ghrelin and peptide YY are those specific hormones. And then, so typically when we talk about fat, body fat, we are actually referring to adipose tissue. And adipose tissue is this one, the fat tissue here, is composed of several cells or fat cells. We call them, these cells also, the fat cell, as adipocytes, okay, or adipose cells. And this is where your fat in the body is stored, and they're stored in droplet form. Okay, so this droplet can greatly enlarge, no? So to accommodate the accumulation of fat, so they swell indefinitely. So this is the just to give you an example of how fats accumulate in the body. The number of adipocytes, however, is dependent on whether the child, and as an infant or as a fetus in the mother's womb, has been is at greater risk or is at a greater risk to being obese. So if an infant tends to be overweight or obese during that period of critical development during infancy, he or she will have a higher number of adipocytes compared to an infant who is not overweight or obese. So as an effect there, an infant who is obese during that period, infancy period, will likely to be overweight or obese in adulthood. And at the same time, he or she will have a more difficult time to reduce his or her weight compared to a non-obese, non-overweight infant because of the number of adipocytes. So in relation to what, in other words, the fewer number of adipocytes, the less likely the person will be overweight, obese. Take for instance myself. When I was born, I was very small, like literally very small. I was compared to even a bottle of an 8-ounce Coca-Cola. Can you imagine? So if you compare my stature, my physique, to that of an average Filipino male, I have a smaller stature. Okay, because I was small. In fact, the reason for that is that I think I don't know if I told you this story, but I probably told this story to the higher years. Before I was born, I have a sister, an older sister, and yeah, yes, you probably can. I'm tall, basically, compared to the average Filipino male, but I am slender. Okay, and the reason is during when my mother was carrying my elder sister, she had a tendency to eat a lot. So my sister grew in her womb to, very large proportions. So she was big when my mother delivered her. They both of them almost died. I think the story was that the doctor almost scheduled for an emergency C-section, cesarean section. So because my sister won't, come out because she was very big, and so that almost that situation, that incident almost killed them both. So when I was conceived, my mother was very she had a traumatic experience, so she didn't want to repeat, what happened the first time around. So she was very picky. She didn't eat a lot, so her weight gain was not that well as also. So I was small when I was delivered. So she easily, like, compared to when she was delivering my sister, and we know that delivering a second child compared to the first delivery is always the hardest. So relatively, the second and succeeding deliveries will be easier. Um, but it's far more easier for my mother to deliver me, to give birth to me, because I was very small. No, like I said, an 8-ounce bottle of Coca-Cola. But I did catch up my growth. At 1 year old, I picked up the growth. That's called the canalization of growth, maturation, and growth. And we will discuss that when we go into ND28, which is life stages in detail. No? But I'm talking about this because I am small. I have a small stature, and I only picked up growth at beginning around 1 year old. That means during my first year of life, I was still catching up. No, so that means I could not be obese or overweight during that period. So my number of adipocytes during that time and until now is lower than a child who's during the infancy years has what tended to be overweight or obese. Okay, so that's what I'm getting at here. Um, so, asan na ni? Right. When we talk about the functions of fats, there are several. And first is an energy store. We discussed this already. Chief form of stored energy is fat, and this is in the form of adipocytes. In the form of adipose tissues that can be readily broken down and or converted into fuel source. And another is muscle fuel. Fats provide actually a lot of energy for fuel to support muscular work, especially if you're trying to do heavy types of physical activity. It can also serve as padding. Fat provides padding in the body cavities, no, in between internal organs, and they provide support for and prevention against internal shock. Butt fat. Yeah, I have very little butt fat, so if I sit in a rough, uncushioned chair or a seat, I don't last that long. I have to get up, kay sakit. Anyway, I'm not sure if this is a true story, but it seems to be circling around, at least during that time that I learned about this particular story, that I don't know if you are familiar um, with the ocean liner Titanic that sunk in the early 1900s. I think I'm no longer I forgot the year, but it was a very famous ship, and it's a very big ship, the largest of its kind in that particular era, and it was thought to be unsinkable. But anyway, it took a small. It wasn't really a small iceberg, but it took only an iceberg. Yes, the Titanic took an iceberg to bring it down, no, sink it in the middle of an ocean in freezing winter, and there were thousands of people on board that ship when it sunk, and it was said that because it was freezing cold, and it was during the night. It happened during the sinking of the Titanic. The ship happened during the night. It was freezing cold. It was in middle of winter, and so many of them did not have access to lorries, kanang small boats, bitaw. And a lot of people were just floating around after the because the ship actually broke into two parts, two pieces. No, it broke apart, and a lot of people who didn't had who were not who were unfortunate to get into the lorries. They had kanang they were just floating around. They were wearing their life jacket, and they were floating around. But because the layo kay sila from the shoreline, and so therefore it took several hours for the rescue to happen. A lot of them died in the water while floating. I don't know if you saw that movie, but apparently people who were overweight and obese tended to die last than people who are thin like me. And that makes sense because they actually as padding. No, I think I've skipped already. There, the next one is insulation as function of fat. So they insulate against the body temperature extremes. No, so that means external temperatures like too cold or too hot. The fats are able to insulate, forming that layer under that skin. So it said that the more obese the person, the longer they live. And so therefore, that I think other than being able to float, the because fats, lipids have a lower molecular weight compared to water, so the tendency is that fat will float. Similar to if you would add water in a glass half filled with, I mean, if you add oil to a glass half filled with water, the oil will rise above the surface of the water because the molecular weight of fat or oil is lighter than that of water. So other than floating, the natural floater, the more fat the people, the warmer they are, and so the longer they live in freezing cold. And then cell membranes, they form a major material in the cell membrane, and they are also they also provide the raw materials for substances in the body that are critical to a lot of things, including critical aspects of metabolism, including hormones, bile, and vitamin D as needed. No, vitamin D in the form of sorry, vitamin D in the form of calcitriol. Calcitriol is the active form of vitamin D, also known as 1,25 dihydroxycholecalciferol. I'm just gonna type it here. Calcitriol, or more formally 1,25 dihydroxycholecalciferol. Dihydroxycholecalciferol. This is the active form of vitamin D, and there, the cholecalciferol there is actually cholesterol, which is fat. Okay, cholecalciferol is derived from cholesterol. So the active form of vitamin D is actually partly fat, which is cholesterol. And then so we go to the next. There. In when people talk about fat, for instance, when they say I'm too fat, or when they say that particular food item is too fatty, they're actually referring to the most prominent of the fats, known as triglycerides. Okay, and among the lipids, fats are actually one of the most main important lipids. No, I mean triglycerides. They predominate. They are the chief form of fat in foods, as well as the main storage form of fat in the body. So when you talk about triglycerides, we look at the the term, the name, triglycerides. Tri referring to the component of fat, one of the components of fat, which are the fatty acids, and referring to the three fatty acids in jiggly portion. Yes, the three fatty acids in the molecule. So the glyceride here, from the term glyceride, refers to the glycerol, which is the backbone of triglyceride. Okay, so when we talk about, again, triglyceride, which is the chief form of fat in foods, as well as the main or the predominant body fat, therefore fat found in the body, um, is actually composed of three fatty acids and a glycerol backbone, hence the term triglyceride. So if you look at this figure, shows you exactly what I'm referring to. A triglyceride is this molecule here, and if you break down the triglyceride, you find that there is here a glycerol backbone and the three fatty acids that, when combined, form the molecule triglyceride. Okay, each fatty acid here differ in length. Okay, and usually they are, if you remember our discussion in energy metabolism, the fatty acids are usually broken down into smaller chains, no, before they are converted into substrates that are that are then used in the body in terms of energy production, ATP. Okay, so right, take a bit lang, sorry. So when you talk about fatty acids, we're talking about chains, and we described already the fatty acids earlier. Chains of nutrient fragments. These are fat fragments. Okay, and we look at fatty acids similar to when we look at carbohydrates. We look at them in terms of the number of saccharide units. Okay, for proteins, we look at proteins as amino acids in terms of amino acid length, no? And so therefore we look at them in either in several forms, dipeptides, oligopeptides, and polypeptides. But for fat, similarly, no, we look at them in terms of their difference in length and the degree of saturation, and we will talk about the saturation. No? So in that sense, we classify fats therefore according to degree of saturation, mostly in terms of degree of one of the classifications, by the way, of fats is in terms of degree of saturation. And when we talk about the degree of saturation, there are three classifications of fats. Therefore, we classify them, number one, as saturated fats. When you talk about saturated fats, these are fatty acids that carry a maximum possible number of hydrogen atoms without saturation. Okay, no saturation at all. So saturated fats are have no unsaturated points. Okay, so all in that sense, when we talk about saturation, that means this fat molecule have all their available carbon atoms filled to capacity with hydrogen, meaning to say all of their hydrogen or carbon atoms are linked to hydrogen atoms. There are no free or available carbon atoms. So they are fully saturated. Okay, when all the carbon atoms are filled to capacity with hydrogen atoms, they are known to be fully saturated. Okay, so that's one classification. Saturated fats have all carbon atoms filled with hydrogen atoms. So in relation to because of this, they only have single bonds between the carbons, and I'll show you the figure that you can easily distinguish what is meant by filling capacity with hydrogen atoms. So classification of another classification of fats are in terms of degree of saturation. So we have the fully saturated at capacity, that's a saturated fat, and then the unsaturated fatty acids. And there are two types of unsaturated fatty acids: those who have only one unsaturation point, and then those who have two or more unsaturation points. Okay, and when we talk about unsaturation, we are talking about hydrogen atoms missing as opposed to being fully filled at capacity in fully saturated fatty acids. No? So in unsaturated fats, they have missing hydrogen atoms from the fatty acid chain. So when we talk about, because I already introduced to you on the concept of degree of saturation, where there are points of unsaturation. When you talk about points of unsaturation, we're talking about the places where hydrogen atoms are missing. Okay, so the places where hydrogen atoms are missing are called points of unsaturation. So therefore, when we talk about unsaturated fat, we either classify them as those who have, as I mentioned earlier, those who have only single unsaturation points, and therefore they are called mono referring to one. So only one unsaturation point, and then the other would be the poly. If you talk about the monounsaturated, only one point of unsaturation, and the most important examples of the monounsaturated fatty acids, by the way, we call them MUFA or MUFA. These are fatty acids that has only one point of unsaturation, and the example are oleic acid found in olive oil. Another classification of fat are called the polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFA or PUFA, are fatty acids that have two or more points of unsaturation, and the most important examples there are the essential fatty acids linoleic and linolenic fats or fatty acids. Um, if we then talk about polyunsaturated fatty acids, these are fats that are composed of triglycerides containing high percentage of, and therefore thus no kanang when we talk about mostly polyunsaturated, these are fats that are triglycerides containing high percentage of PUFA, okay, or polyunsaturated fatty acids. So I mentioned earlier that we will talk about the to give you an example, to give you a sense of a better understanding, no, is the three types of fats and where they are and the degrees of unsaturation. So saturated fats look like this, kind of a linear linear bonding, no, where all single bonds only, because all of their hydrogen atoms are paired. I mean, carbon atoms are paired with hydrogen atoms. As compared to a monounsaturated, you find that there's one point there where one hydrogen atom is missing, and therefore the other bond is linked to another carbon atom in the adjacent carbon. Okay, so that is where the double bond is found, and therefore is called the point of unsaturation. If there's only one double bond, then we call that fat as monounsaturated fat, MUFA. If there are two or more points of unsaturation and therefore double bonds, then we call them polyunsaturated fats. Okay, so how do we what are the types of fat that are considered saturated like this, no, whose carbon atoms are filled at capacity with hydrogen atoms? These are the sample fatty acids that are known to be saturated. This is the nomenclature, by the way. So just, this is in the eyes of a chemist, they use the nomenclature here. But let's just look at the typical names of the fatty acids. acetic acid is widely seen as a primary component of vinegar. Okay, so yes, vinegar is actually fatty acid. Acetic acid from butyric acid, caproic acid, caprylic, capric, lauric, myristic, and so many others, and they're found in these food items. Okay, so arachidic acid are mostly found, fatty acids that are mostly found in peanuts, for instance. Okay, so what about monounsaturated fats? Here, usually these are um, palmitoleic fatty acid is usually found in fish and animal fats in the form of oils. And then there are others now, oleic, cisvaccinic, eicosanoic, gadoleic, erucic, and so many others and then found in these food items. Okay, just to show you that these are the types of fatty acids typically found in these sources in the food. And then we go to the polyunsaturated fats. There we have linoleic, alpha-linolenic. These are your essential fats, primarily from plants. And then, and I'd like to point out eicosapentaenoic acid or EPA and docosahexaenoic acid as the um, omega-3 fatty acids that are essential fatty acids, primarily found in fish oils. Okay, so these are the omega-6 and then the omega-3. Okay, well, we'll talk about them at length in the succeeding slides. So this is just to give you an example of the food items found in those fatty acids found in particular or example food items. And then, okay, so we've learned that there are 3 types of fats: saturated, MUFA, PUFA, and then another would be dietary cholesterol. Okay. By the way, when you talk about cholesterol, I no longer want you to say that cholesterol are or is bad. Okay, they are not bad. There is no such thing as bad food. There's only bad behavior to food. Cholesterol is a very important nutrient that is involved in transport and metabolism of important products, metabolic products in the body. But similar to other nutrients, too much of cholesterol has an adverse effect, including atherosclerosis and CHD, no, cardiovascular disease. But we'll talk more about them in when you go into your higher professional courses, such as medical nutrition therapy. So this is just to show you that fat is spread across a variety of food items found in the diet, from skimmed milk to yogurt to lentils, cauliflower, even cashew nuts, and there are even food items that have all 3 types of fat, including cholesterol. For instance, I'm going to refer you to egg. An egg, a common serving size of about 32 grams, will give you about 3.4 grams of saturated fat, 4.6 of monounsaturated fats, and 1.2 grams of polyunsaturated fats. On top of which, it will give you 412 milligrams of cholesterol, dietary cholesterol, not blood cholesterol. So, by the way, if some authorities are actually claiming a lot less than this. Some are saying a large, even at 60 grams na egg, only has about 200 milligrams of cholesterol. So this is high actually. According to many authorities, a 300 milligram intake of dietary cholesterol per day is the recommended. Meaning to say, if this is true, if you eat 1 piece of medium-sized 32-gram egg, the whole thing, then you get 412 milligrams of cholesterol, and that's higher. That's more than the recommended dietary intake of cholesterol, if 300 is the limit, okay, recommended intake. That means if you eat one egg, that's it. You've finished your recommendation intake for cholesterol per day. Okay, so that's critical, especially if a patient or a person is has high levels of cholesterol in the blood, as in hypercholesterolemia. Well, for there are that actually, okay, let me explain this. There are conflicting and contradictory studies on egg. And in fact, several decades ago, egg came to a very bad light when scientists were saying that, you know, an egg a day may be detrimental to your health. But there was a study in Harvard involving thousands of participants, and the study found and recommended in the end that even for healthy individuals, consuming up to seven pieces of eggs per day did not yield any adverse effect. So um uh so in relation to which, but there was a time when I was like, okay, I'm not gonna eat egg. But I love saturated fats, manggod. I don't know. Lamig mo ng nadya ng mga chicharon, mga huktus humba. So humba ang pinapaborito pagid kayo. And um I like eggs as well, usually for breakfast, no. So, but you know, breakfast for me is any time of the day, man. So in I don't I don't agree nga lami ang bawal. It's not bawal. It's only again, no, as nutrition students, we look at the bawal and food items in terms of how much is recommended. How much are we supposed to eat without causing any adverse effect? So moderation there is the key. Um uh Si Gaston gani sa Beauty and the Beast kay 5 dozen eggs. I'm not familiar. I'm not familiar who this Gaston individual is, but 5 dozen eggs per day. That's crazy. That is crazy. That's way too much. Way too much. Okay. So this is just to show you that again, to show you that food items have different sources of fat and different types of fat in them. So when we apply this, we usually talk about if the application is in the clinical nutrition side, then we say maybe avoid food items that are low in saturated fats. Okay. So for instance, compared to the degree of saturation, there are food items that are really high in in polyunsaturated and monounsaturated, but very low as well in saturated. As an example, peanuts. So in that sense, if you're careful about the type of fat that you're taking in as part of your diet, then if you compare peanuts against egg, then in terms of fat content, peanuts is better because they contain more monounsaturated and more polyunsaturated rather than um, saturated fats. Okay. Makatawa lagi ko ana lamig jud ng bawal. That means it can be anything. Maybe you're talking about something else other than food. Um, um, so another, just to give you more examples, no, from common food items like fish, sausage, beef, and so a fried chicken will give you mostly monounsaturated, but it also contains significant amounts of um, saturated fats. Pizza, this is just a typical that's typical lang, but may not be reflective of all pizzas. Others, no, like hamburger and biscuits and sunflower olive oil. Okay, so that's just to give you an example. Um, Now, the next slide is very important. So I want you to listen very carefully. Okay, this is very important. And we'll talk about the digestion and absorption of dietary lipids. So, okay, let's go on. I know some of you may find this scary. I know I found this scary at first. Um, and if you look at this figure right here, okay, these are the in this section here, you'll find the different types of dietary fats. Okay, you have cholesterol, triacylglycerol. PL is, ay wait, sorry, I'm gonna admit your classmate. Oh, Macy Rose, nawala. PL is actually phospholipid, and C is cholesterol ester, and then bile acids. Okay, and this is now the dietary fats that are um, in the small intestine. Okay, so as soon as the dietary fats enter the small intestine from the stomach, remember, if you remember our discussion on absorption and digestion, fats, all food items go through the stomach from the esophagus now, if they are traveling or traversing from the esophagus, entering the stomach, and then later on they become chyme, and chyme enters the small intestine, the first part of the small intestine known as the duodenum or the duodenum. And as soon as these dietary fats enter the lumen of the intestine, the lumen is the channel, okay? The lumen of the intestine, these dietary fats, cholesterol, triacyl, glycerol, phospholipids, cholesterol ester, and bile, and cholesterol ester, these are sila, no? Your uh, your, what do you call this? Your gallbladder releases bile acids into the intestine where the fats are located, the dietary fats are located. So what they do is they form as soon as that happens, as soon as the dietary fats enter the lumen of the intestine and the bile acids are released from the gallbladder, the the bile acids attached to the dietary fats in now in the intestine to form an emulsion particle. Remember that bile serves as an emulsifier. An emulsifying agent, bile here, allows for enzymes to work on these fats. Okay, so that enzymes, the PLA2 here, PLA2 enzymes, PLA2 are phospholipase A2, which are basically the enzymes that are responsible for breaking down phospholipids. These are the phospholipids. So PLA2 or phospholipid A2 is responsible for breaking down phospholipids into a free fatty acid, free Fa, and a lysophospholipid, the LPL. So it's either PLA2 breaks down PL into FFA, one FFA, and a lysophospholipid, LPL. Okay. Another enzyme known as PLPS. PLPS is pancreatic lipase, breaks down uh, triacylglycerol or TG into a monoglyceride or MG and two FFA, free fatty acids. Okay, PLPS or pancreatic lipase breaks down TG, triacylglycerol, into two FFA and a monoglyceride. Okay. Another is cholesterol esterase or CAs, um, splits cholesterol ester, this type of fat, okay, into the cholesterol esterase, splits the cholesterol, but yes, cholesterol ester into free cholesterol and a free fatty acid. Okay, a free cholesterol and a fatty acid. This one. There's no need to digest cholesterol here because it's already in free form. So a cholesterol ester has a fatty acid attached to the cholesterol body. Okay. and this needs to be broken down. Kini siya. Look at this. This is similar to this one. So what the cholesterol esterase is to break down cholesterol ester into a free cholesterol like this one and a free fatty acid. Here. Kani siya. These are free fatty acid. Okay? So that as a result, the mix, by the way, all of them, these broken down dietary fats by different enzymes are, when they're broken down, they form what are called micelles, or micelles. And these are different micelles. Okay, the micelles are able to then diffuse into the mucosal cell of the intestine. So they get absorbed. Okay, diffusion here is the absorption part. Well, part of the absorption, the first part of the absorption actually. Diffusion, where they enter these types of fatty acids, enter the mucosal cell. But the bile acids that forms along with the broken down parts of fatty acids, no, the different types of fats, are the bile acids are in the micelles are not absorbed together with the fats. Okay, they are left out. See, they're left out. These are the bile acids from here. So again, now from emulsion particle, the different types of fat gets broken down into several smaller portions of fat, and then form what are known as micelles. They're broken down by several types of enzymes. They form micelles together with bile acids. And when they get diffused into the mucosal cell, bile acids are not absorbed. Okay? So that's very important. Now, of the broken down byproducts, types of fats that enter the mucosal cell, the free fatty acids immediately are absorbed into the portal circulation. Okay, those that are usually short chain and medium chain fats, known as the free fatty acids, enter the portal circulation into the blood. But those that are bigger in structure, the monoglyceride, cholesterol, and what's LPL gane? Lysophospholipids. Because they are big and we need them in their original structures known as parental structures, they have to be resynthesized to their original form. So a monoglyceride has to be resynthesized to its original triacylglycerol. A cholesterol back to cholesterol ester. A lysophospholipid back to phospholipid. Okay, why is this important? In cellular biology, the biochemical process here they have to be returned or resynthesized to their parental forms because of what they call this, because the body needs to maintain what is known as concentration gradient. Remember, if you remember your chemistry, when you talk about concentration gradient, diffusion is the movement of molecules from a higher concentration to a lower concentration, right? So at this point, this is now the higher concentration and they need to move out into the lower concentration into the lymphatic vessels. Okay, so this is critical. So they have to be resynthesized to parental structures, their parental forms, and then together with what is called an apolipoprotein, they form chylomicrons. So when the fats here are resynthesized to their parental forms, look at this. These are the parental forms from your dietary fat. They become TG again, CE, and PL. Together with an apolipoprotein, they become chylomicrons. A chylomicron has the ability to move from this gradient here, from the area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Okay, so that these fats which are in the mucosal cell will enter the lymphatic vessels and they drain into the lymphoid tissues and then rapidly drain into the blood. Okay, so maybe at this point you have a question or two. So clarification. Is there a clarification or was that clear enough? I'm just gonna, can we take a 1, 2 or 2 minute break? I'm just gonna grab a bottle of water kaya I have itchy throat at this point. So if this is clear, I can go to the next. So as soon as the fats are absorbed, they will need to be transported to the different parts of the body that need them, where they will be used in making other products, or they will be converted to something else, particularly in the liver, before they are useful, no, in other parts of the body. And so therefore, we will now talk about the lipid transport and lipoprotein metabolism. Remember that, and in particular, we're talking about the fatty acids are usually found in the muscle and adipose tissues, directly used in other including as well in peripheral tissues. But we'll begin our story with the chylomicrons. Okay, the chylomicrons here are made up primarily of triacylglycerol. Okay, they're TG. So look at the chylomicron here. This is they're made up of TG, PL, a phospholipid, a cholesterol ester plus cholesterol, and then because it is, remember in the previous slide, it's made of apolipoprotein, the chylomicron, together with the other fats. Then they have a protein structure as well. So proteins are actually part of lipoproteins. That's why we call them lipoprotein, lipo referring to fat, and protein referring to the amino acid structure, okay, of the molecule. So as soon as a chylomicrons, they are the transporters of the fats, so that they are able to get absorbed, no, into the blood. As soon as upon entering the blood, the chylomicrons pick up two types of apolipoproteins. Okay, chylomicrons, they pick up apolipoprotein C and then E. Now, where do they get this from? They get these apolipoproteins from circulating high density lipoprotein, or HDL, kanisha, this one. So the apolipoprotein C activates lipoprotein lipoprotein lipase, or LL, which are produced in the capillaries, causing the triacylglycerol, the TG here, to be broken down to glycerol and fatty acids. Okay, so that the fatty acids can then taken up primarily by adipose tissue and muscle tissue. Okay, and then during the breakdown of triacylglycerol, some cholesterol, okay, some cholesterol are as well as cholesterol ester and phospholipids, along with apolipoprotein C and E. Okay, some of the C and E. So here, cholesterol ester, phospholipids, ApoC and E. They pinch off bar. They become some of them become HDL. Okay, the remaining, whatever remains, okay, that's about 20%, 20 to 30% of the chylomicrons that remains after this pinches off to become HDL. The remnant are actually bound to a receptor in the liver, okay, the cells in the liver, and then removed from the circulation. They enter the liver when they are bound to a receptor of the liver cell. The liver cells are known as hepatocytes. Okay. So once they do that, the lipids synthesized in the liver and those delivered to the liver by chylomicron remnants, no? Remnants here, meaning to say those that are about 20 to 30% that are left when these guys here, the CCEPL, ApoC, and E form HDL, they enter the liver via a receptor in the liver cells. Okay. And then they are synthesized by the liver into what is called very low density lipoprotein. Okay. And then enter the blood. Okay. VLDL picks up again apolipoprotein C and E. Okay. The VLDL. Once they are synthesized and released into the blood by the liver, they pick up ApoC and E. And then, wait, admit, okay. And then, where are we? Okay, here in VLDL, another LL. LL is, what is LL again? LL is the lipoprotein lipase. So it's another enzyme. This is the LL is activated by ApoC. Okay, ApoC breaks down VLDL. They break down VLDL, primarily the TAG and the fatty acids, and then the fatty acids enter the peripheral tissues. Okay, and then resulting in the formation of what is known as an IDL, or intermediate density lipoprotein. This one right here. Is daganang nisulod. Let me just, okay. And then, where are we? So when nearly after this, when nearly all of the TAG or your TG is removed from the IDL, they produce what is called a very cholesterol-rich compound known as LDL, or low density lipoprotein. Okay, and then the cholesterol is delivered to the cells when LDL binds to LDL receptors, which are in the tissues. Okay, the LDL receptors are in the cells, and then they are delivered inside the peripheral tissues. Okay, so this is how the body utilizes the different fats from the diet. So we're talking about how the fats are the lipids, several types of lipids gets transported from the diet, and when they are into the blood, the several pathways that they have to go through before they are. So the most what do you call this? The most the fatty acids that has to go through the most number of processes are actually those that enter the peripheral tissues. So free fatty acids, easy ra kayo, no? As soon as chylomicrons enter the blood, they pick up ApoCE, and then this activates lipoprotein lipase, which breaks down primarily TG into free fatty acids, and free fatty acids gets directly taken up by muscle and adipose tissue. The opposing is that the remaining chylomicrons get either converted into pinch off to become HDL, or go through the liver to become VLDL, and then from there become an IDL, and then from there become an LDL before an LDL enters the peripheral tissues. Right? Sige. I know this tends to be a little bit confusing as well, but just review that discussion lang. Why are lipoproteins needed to transport? That's an interesting question. I've been asking that myself, but that's basically how they move. Okay, and that's the mechanism that the body employs to be able, so that we are able to use them in those forms. Okay, so without the lipoproteins, we cannot move the lipids. Yeah, we cannot use them. I'm not really familiar with exactly the exact biochemical reason why can't they just, without, why do they need a transporter? But there are several other lipids that do not need transport, but there are some lipids that are mga kuan ba, mga hilas ni sila nga lipids kinahanglan og yaya, kinahanglan dai mohatod nila lipoproteins. So lipoproteins are like the yaya. They transport, they bring the guys to the, so in relation to which HDL, actually, because of this HDL, um, remnants of uh, um, the cycle here is the kaning VLDL and HDL and LDL, including VLDL. They pick up, HDL pick up the remnants of LDL, so that they get returned to the body, to the liver for recycling. It's the LDL, actually, some VLDL as well. Well, partly VLDL, but mostly LDL, the low density lipoprotein, that are considered to be the bad cholesterol. But actually, they're not pure cholesterol. They're a lot more cholesterol, cholesterol ester plus the cholesterol itself, but they're not entirely pure cholesterol. But people just call them bad cholesterol. But they're not bad. They're lipoproteins. They're supposed to be carrying lipids in to and from the body, via this cycle. Okay? Yeah, na yung hatod nila hilas. Right. So there are several, because it's almost 12, let's pick this up. Several functions of human plasma lipoproteins, and we basically covered them in that review. And so in the body, basically in the foods as well, we look at fats according to hardness. So hardness, whether they form a solid structure or they form a liquid structure like oil. So we talk about hardness in terms of the triglycerides uh, that form the fatty acids. No, the other way around. Combination of fatty acids to form triglycerides. So they can either be long or short chain. It can either be saturated, monounsaturated, as explained earlier, and then degree of saturation. This is just a re-emphasis. Fats with, so in relation to hard and soft fats with shorter chain lengths, more unsaturated, tend to melt easily. So therefore, they form more liquid forms. The shorter the chains. Okay. But they tend to be more solid at room temperature. Like for example, butter. But increasing the temperature a little bit melts the butter. They are the degree of saturation as well in foods, and I'm not gonna discuss this because this is discussed primarily in basic foods, how they behave, no. So yeah, okay lang yan eh. I'm just gonna skip them, right? So in terms of hydrogenation as well, and I'm mentioning hydrogenation even though this is a basic foods concept and topic, because of the health effects of hydrogenation. I will talk about this in a short while. They produce trans fatty acids, and I'm sure you've heard already about trans fats, but why are they important in human health and nutrition is what we will be focusing on. So trans fats are fatty acids that behave more like saturated fats than like unsaturated fats. So while they are essentially unsaturated fats, they behave more like saturated fats. And as a result, they tend to increase blood cholesterol and is associated with a higher disease risk for cardiovascular diseases. So basically, the fatty acids are usually in two plane forms, and these are the cis and the trans. And this is, and again, chemistry. No, in nature, the most unsaturated fatty acids actually are the cis fatty acids. But when you so again, there are double bonds, and only a few fatty acids in nature, notably those that are found in milk and other meat products, are actually trans fats. Okay, there again, in nature there are two types of plain formation of fatty acids, and they can either be cis or trans. In nature, cis is the most abundant. There are some in nature that fatty acids that are in trans fatty acid form, which means they look like this. Now they have their double bonds. The hydrogen formation is different um, compared to the cis formation. Okay, so opposite siya instead of adjacent. No, in cis adjacent, in trans it's their opposite across the double bond. Okay, the arrangements actually in this configuration for fatty acids affects their behavior in the body. Okay, so the trans fatty acids, while they are unsaturated because of the double bonding found right here, they behave more like saturated. Okay, that's what I meant earlier. So we also talked about the essential fatty acids, and the essential fatty acids actually come from primarily from polyunsaturated fats. Okay, and they're called essential again because our bodies are not able to synthesize them. So examples I mentioned already earlier, linoleic and linolenic acid. They are both polyunsaturated, and because they cannot be made from other substances, they must be obtained from the food that we eat, from our diets. No? And therefore, they're the term essential fats, fatty acids. And the good thing is that they can be readily stored in the body so that we can use them. If you have more of them, we can store them and use them at a later time. And they help regulate a wide variety of body functions, including more recently found immune regulation. So they help our immune system, boost our immune function. As a structural component, they are part of several membranes in the cells or cell membranes. Let's talk about these fatty acids, the linoleic and linolenic acid. They are known as the omega-6. So linoleic acid is an omega-6 fatty acid. They are primarily found in plants. And well, if you're eating regularly, fruits and vegetables in a variety of food items, then you can get these omega-6 fatty acids readily from your food. Um, for linoleic acids, however, they are known as the omega-3. This includes the DHA and the EPA, which I mentioned earlier. Docosahexaenoic acid and eicosapentaenoic acid. The human body cannot, similar to linoleic acid, we cannot synthesize these omega-3 fatty acids. So they have to be, well, the human body cannot make linolenic, okay? But given enough linolenic acid, it can make other, the family can make other DHA and EPA, okay? However, the tendency for the process is rather slow. Yes, there. Yes, yes. Tana si Karil, fish ba daw? Yes, mostly fish oils now. So some people opt to supplement their diet with fish oils. Okay, these are your DHA and EPA. So they're important in metabolism as well as in disease prevention. But we'll talk more on this again in succeeding courses. Okay, there are phospholipids and sterols. Sterols are known as steroid alcohols. Primarily, they are fats, and they make up only 5% of dietary lipids, but they are nevertheless worthy of attention, particularly because of their function in cellular structure and in metabolism as well. So a primary example and one of the most important example of the phospholipids are called the lecithins. Lecithins. Okay. Um, and other sometimes they have a more often than not they have a backbone, glycerol backbone in them. Okay, so they consist of a glycerol with two fatty acids, a phosphate group, and a molecule of choline that is attached to them. And they're used primarily by the food industry as emulsifiers. So they are widely used in food. They're found in many products. But in the body, they also act as emulsifiers. And we know that emulsification of lipids is very important because without emulsification, our enzymes are not able to use them. I mean, our enzymes are not able to act on these catalyzed reaction on these particular products, and therefore our bodies cannot use them. Yes, they're primarily found in eggs, liver, soybeans, wheat germ, and peanuts. Sterols, they are again steroid alcohols. They are large complex molecules consisting of interconnected rings of carbon. And cholesterol is the most familiar of the sterol group. But there are several sterols found in the diet as well in nature. There are plant sterols. I think they're called stanols. I'm not sure, but in fungi, they're called ergosterol that behaves more like the cholesterol produced by the human body. So there are foods, again, I mentioned this already. The cholesterol, our cholesterol in our body, actually, our liver actually produces cholesterol. So like I said, no, it's not a bad thing. We need the cholesterol actually. In fact, for infants, high amounts of cholesterol is deemed essential for them, for infants. Organ meats such as liver, um, um, kidneys, eggs are richest in cholesterol. Other food items such as shellfish, they also contain many sterols, less though with cholesterol. So some people are saying, well, yes, that's true. No, what do you call this? Shrimps are high in cholesterol, but some of the sterols found in shrimp are actually not cholesterol, although definitely they have cholesterol in them. As previously thought, many scientists thought that the sterol found in many of the fish and shellfish are actually cholesterol. They found that to be untrue, but they're still doing a lot of confirmatory research studies. Let's not talk about this lang. We'll talk more about this when you go to the. These are just some of the things that I described earlier about cholesterol, why the LDL and the HDL and their roles. No, but we will talk. I've just included this in this slide so that you have we have a little bit of a background on this. But again, no, we will talk more on the effects of fats and dietary fats and cholesterol for and lipids like LDL, HDL, VLDL in the relationship to the development of cardiovascular diseases, including atherosclerosis and coronary heart disease when you go into your medical nutrition therapy. But like I said, no, I'm just including this in this slide so that you have a bit of a background. So you can also study them. Okay, I'm just gonna skip them. We already discussed this. So food sources, of the essential fatty acids, omega-3 and omega-6, is just a table showing you where you can source these fatty acids from. And then, yes, Karel. When you talk about most in egg yolk is the one that contains the lipids, particularly the cholesterol, no? As I mentioned before, but not an egg doesn't just contain saturated fat, including dietary cholesterol. They also contain um, monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. So quite diverse. That's why a lot of nutrition authorities are actually recommending an egg a day for healthy individuals to supply enough, not just amino acids, no, but the amino acids there found in egg are high biologic value, meaning to say they're very important in terms of providing the essential amino acids. But on top of which, they also provide the different types of fatty acids from saturated to MUFA, PUFA. Okay. So, okay, Kaya supplementing, I also mentioned this. There is, however, we have to be careful with supplementation. As in any other supplementation, any other nutrient, too much is also harmful, is as harmful as too little. Now, when you go to the recommendations for fats, up to 35% of daily intake should come from fat. Now, if you ask me, when you have a proportion of your TER allocated for total fats, you divide the total fats into the three types of fats from saturated, MUFA, PUFA. Meaning to say, if you allow 30% of TER to come from fats, then maybe 10% for saturated, the other 10% for monounsaturated, and the remaining 10% for polyunsaturated fatty acids. But for people who have a tendency to have high cholesterol in their blood and high triglyceride in the blood, the recommendation would be less than 5% for saturated fat. So you do not bring down the entire total fat percentage in the TER, but simply reduce the amount of saturated fat. Okay? Pero fats in food, we already discussed this. Yes, in food particularly, walay lami ang food kung walay fat, kung walay oil. That's why a lot of people tend to like fried fish more than, tinola. But I like both, ganun, the same, no? Ganahan ako both, but there are people who like fried than the boiled or simmered. Also texture. The fat is actually, but I've tried the kanang kuan, what do you call that? Kanang an air fryer. Um, they they have the same texture, but they have different. Um, I can't explain it. It tastes different. Lahi ra gyud. I mean, yes, they look the same. Probably texture is the same, but the taste is a little bit the same. Yes, the air fryer. I'm not really well. I will probably think about buying an air fryer when I become a little bit older than I am today. Maybe when I turn 40, I will gift myself an air fryer. I'll probably just like ask, people kung kinsay mo donate og air fryer to me. Okay, finding fats in food. We know where to katawa ko ani before kana ko nice nami student nga ang recipe calls for fat. But that term is fat because it's generally fat, no, if we're talking about body fat or fat in the body of an animal, which is to be formed food, or oil. But then the recipe calls for fat and in grams, so I think 60 grams fat. So that means if you're the chef, or you're the student, if imo na siyang i-convert into something useful for your recipe, then what it really means is for you to choose whether you're going to use butter, lard, or any plant-based oil. But this student went to the market, went to the meat section of the market, and then bought kanang fat sa pork. So nipalit ra siya og 60 grams nga tambok sa baboy. Yung mo yung gidalas skilahan. I guess that is not it's funny, but it's failure of us, no, the teachers, to explain that to them. Wala siya kasabot. Yang ipasabot sa fat sa recipe is not the animal fat. It's the fat nga sa mo na paggamit ng kung magprito ka, pritohon nimo gamit og fat sa baboy. Sa mo nimo katawa ko ano, but then like I said, it's failure of the teachers rather than that of the student. Or maybe it wasn't the failure of the teachers, but failure of the student to listen and to comprehend. Or maybe even study, basig absent to siya, or asa ra dagway itong dapitas, kalibutan, physically present but mentally absent. No? Alright, and then, okay rin eh, because these are more readily discussed in the lab. I'm just gonna skip this. No. Okay rin eh. I'm including this protein for in this section because there are if you notice sa inyong FEL, we classify protein foods according to fat content. So they can be low fat to those that are lean, medium fat, and then high fat. For instance, medium fat, a classification there, egg is usually traditionally placed under protein foods, but they are medium fat. Okay, meaning to say they contain medium amounts of fat compared to other foods. Ano na? Okay na po na. These are just basics lang. I'm gonna show you this there. These are the food items, comparing how you can reduce the fat in your food. No, for instance, a pork chop that has all the fat in it, with the fat ni pork, will give you about 290 kcal and about 9 grams of saturated fat. But if you trim the fat, no, the layer here, then the saturated fat of that dish will significantly drop down from 9 to 3 grams, which means you can save about 116 kcal, 16 grams of total fat, and 6 grams of saturated fat. So you can do that actually. So if you have this, simply removing butter, no, makawala ng fat, saturated fat. If you're using whole milk, that's also high in saturated fat. If you're using low-fat milk or even skimmed milk, that means you can reduce your intake of saturated fat. This is just to give you that example. I'm not gonna discuss this. We've already discussed this in previously. No, I'm skipping because these are all very easily understandable na items, and because it's already 12. But before we go though, if you have a specific question right now. Yes. Okay. Maurice is asking, they are non-polar, meaning to say because they are non-polar, they are um, they are not immiscible in water. And what will happen if daghan water ma-absorb? Now, that's the function of emulsification. Okay? Remember an emulsification, if you have, take for instance in basic foods, para kuan niyo ma-understand niyo. If you're trying to make mayonnaise, what you want to do is to emulsify the fat, no? Emulsify the fat lang yun with the water. Now, how do you do that? You usually add an acid, usually a lemon or a vinegar, and then you vigorously mo siyang i-beat. No, beat ba na? Imo siya i-mix, no? And then mix and then very vigorously for a long time. not long time. Depende sa imuhang emulsification agent nga igamit. And then ultimately they become a homogeneous kanang solution, right? So they become one. No, mix siya together. That's the idea of emulsification. It doesn't really matter. Too much water is not really an issue relative to fat intake. Okay? It's water is more of an issue towards electrolyte balance, fluid and electrolyte balance, but not ang issue ra gid ana is if the body lacks emulsification agents that allows for kanang action of enzymes. But that's a good question. Pareha na. If you have kato ako example ganiha, if you have a glass half filled with water and then you add oil, even if you shake them vigorously, they at a time they will kind of come together, no, like a homogeneous solution. But if you leave the glass, alone, the water and fat and the oil will begin to separate, and then oil will rise to the surface of the water. But if you add vinegar to the solution, to the water and oil solution, and then shake, the emulsified form, meaning to say the homogeneous solution that forms out of the three of them, the fat, the water, and the oil, the water, and the vinegar, the emulsified form will hold far longer than when you just use water and oil and then shake. So layin ninyo na experiment. You have two glasses. Both glasses have the same amount of water, add the same amount of oil to the two glasses, and then ang usa ka glass B, butangan ninyo, let's say 2 tablespoons of vinegar, and then shake them both. Then i-shake niyo na both for like 5 to 10 minutes, vigorously shaking, and then leave them on the table. See kung asa ang mixture nga ni hold ang iyang homogeneous nga form between the two glasses, and you'll realize that's what I meant. Now it's important because in human nutrition, that's important because we know that enzymes work in um in 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 liquid gradients. They work in water. Okay, and most enzymes do not work in any other medium. They have to work in water. So how do we do that? How do we turn around that issue? We emulsify so that we mix together ang fat and water, and so therefore enzymes can then work on them. Okay, isa pa. Carol is asking, which is a more effective weight loss diet, low carb or low fat diet? Okay, that's a good question. Very good question. But it does not matter if you're going for low carb or low fat diet. What matters is the total energy. Because if you're saying, if your intake is at 3,000 while your recommended intake is only at 2,000, then that means you have an excess of 1,000. The 1,000 kcal does for as long as they are provided in food, it doesn't matter if they're provided via fat rich food or carbohydrate rich food. Okay, so what we're really gunning for, if you really want to reduce weight, is look at the total energy instead of the individual macronutrient allocation. Good. Sige, isa pa. I'm gonna stop sharing now.